Hello, teaching theology graduate students. Happy Friday afternoon. I hope this video message finds all of you healthy and hanging in there as best as possible. I'm thinking of you all the time. And this afternoon, I wanted to share some resources with you about the topic of visiting field sites, encouraging your faith and critical reason students to visit religious communities in New York City. This is not a required part of Faith and Critical Reason, but it's an optional one. And if you're interested in including something like that in the syllabus, I wanted to just give you some things to think about and some resources and ways you might conceptualize including something like that in the syllabus. And I think if we remember our student visitors earlier in the semester. For one of them, visiting religious communities in New York City was by far what she remembered the most of it. So I think that undoubtedly, students really gain a lot from going out into the city and checking out religious communities that are new to them. I think it's a matter of, do you have the bandwidth to put it together this semester, or is it something you want to learn about and think about for future semesters? Um, Very optional and up to you. But I thought we would begin by opening the attachment that you have here in your inbox. It is a set of slides in a PDF form. That the slides are shared with you by permission from Dr. Henry Goldschmidt, who is the director of programs for New York City's Interfaith Seminar. He actually came to campus last spring as part of one of the Wabash seminars on religious diversity, and he gave a lecture specifically to Fordham faculty and teaching graduate students about this topic. So with his permission, I'm just going to share the slides with you and talk about some of the things that Dr. Goldschmidt talked about when he came, and share some experiences that I've had with students. So if we can gather together and open up your slides, and I will just go through these and tell you how we'll scroll and tell you when to scroll down. So his lecture was Learning from Your Neighbor's Sacred Spaces, a somewhat practical guide for student site visits to houses of worship. Okay, so as you're thinking about whether or not you want to consider this for your syllabus, I'm now on the second slide. One thing it is to think about what it is you would want your students to gain from an experience of visiting a house of worship, visiting religious communities. How might you frame it, and why would you want to do this? And what you want to do is really try to get your students to think about a field site in ways other than just kind of a fun, like, tourist experience. What knowledge do you want them to gain? What critical skills? What do you want them to get out of it? And there's many different, things they can get out of it. They also are not mutually exclusive, but some of the different ideas are: do you want them to get content about religion, like go to a mosque and learn something about Islam? Do you want them to gain analytic skills about, for example, how to conduct field research? Do you want to establish a longer term partnership with a particular faith community? Are you interested in students developing education in other skills, such as character building, of empathy, tolerance? Do you want students to explore some of their own faith and spirituality, and countless other things? But I think the most important thing is to really think carefully and plan accordingly and be really explicit. That's one thing I've really have learned over the years, just say very explicitly, what you have in mind, why you have a project in the syllabus, what you hope they get out of it. And, as Henry says here in this slide, don't be too heavy handed. Of course, their experiences are going to sort of exceed the bounds of any analytic hopes or frames or goals you have, but to just be explicit about what it is you want them to do. And the different types of visits, and I'm down now on the third slide. I would say for the particular context of faith and critical reason, the main the two biggest differences are, would you want to take your whole class to a particular religious community? And this would be probably taking them to a bigger religious community, um, and do kind of a big field trip. Those are a little bit more complicated to organize. I've done that, but they end up being kind of a big part of the semester. So if you have something in mind, you already have some relationship somewhere, this could be a good option for you. But the more common thing to do is to have students on their own visit religious sites. And I think from one of our student visitors, I think a great option can be encouraging them to go in groups. That can be a nice sort of community and relational building part of the course. So you might even have them sign up in groups of 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 and just decide on their own where they're going to go. So those are the two basic things you want to do. People at Fordham in our department do both of those things. Um, and you'd want to think and maybe plan ahead or have them decide what it is you want them to do when they're there. Are they going to participate in a prayer service, in a religious meditation, in a religious event? Are they going to kind of be in the background observing? Do they want to do an interview with a community leader? Are they going to look at religious art? Are they going to engage in volunteering or service learning? And as you think about the various things students could do when they visit a religious community, keep in mind for them, the distinction between participation and observation. And I think many students are excited often and willing to participate as guests, as visitors in religious sites. But Dr. Goldschmidt, I remember talking explicitly about creating an opt-out assignment for people who might not feel comfortable with doing the direct participation in a religious community. So having like an observation component, or having the assignment be optional, or having some choice within the assignment of different places they could go. Um, and I would say, and then to move down, now I'm on the third slide. He says, we're talking about here place sites in broader contexts. This is something that I think could be the very basic kind of so what that you could present to your students. That one thing that field visits do, and this would have to be framed by you, of course, this isn't something I don't think that most students would be able to come up with on their own, is that whatever community they visit, that that you are explicit with them that it doesn't represent an entire faith tradition. So it can be really helpful to study a religious tradition in the classroom, and then they go to a field visit if you do something on Islam, and then they go to a mosque, or you're studying African American Christianity, they go to have an experience at one of the Black church institutions in New York City, that you will see just from kind of the textual and the lived experience some internal diversity. But really talking about the internal pluralism of a religious tradition is a really, really important framing tool. That this sort of religious site-based education really should consistently stress the diversity within every faith tradition, even geographic diversity, ethnic, racial, doctrinal, denominational visit, that often before students go, you might even, do some comparisons. If they're going to a Catholic church, show them a Catholic church in the Upper West Side they might be going to, comparing it to Catholic churches in Brazil you could do in class. And even for freshmen, that's a big insight, that there's no one way to be a Muslim or one way to be a Catholic. But giving them some experience of that internal diversity can be a really simple but big and powerful takeaway for faith and critical reason students. And I'm going down now to this the fourth slide here, where Dr. Goldschmidt is talking about the Hindu Temple Society of North America, the Ganesh Temple, that he has taken students to a large temple in Queens, and I am not familiar with it. I know actually Janine has taken her students to a large Hindu temple in Queens, and these are some images from it, but I'm not that familiar with it. But he is talking about slides you can show, from the neighborhood, but also, and then I'm just going down, showing them, some of the temple deities they might see, but also comparing them. And I'm just kind of going through comparing them with the countless temples in India, for example. So I know that this temple, this Hindu temple in Queens, is very popular and accepts a lot of visitors. It's really sort of a tourist site in New York City. And there's a lot of information available online. And you can get some of this from these slides. But he has, and I'm down to the next slide, where he has images, two more of the many temples in Queens. He's talking about everything. Hindu temples can be, that little orange house is a little household temple in a neighborhood in Queens, up to the very, very much more elaborate gilded temples, Hindu temples in Queens. So this is just a little mini example of something that he has done. He actually teaches a lot on religious diversity to public high schools in New York. But really, the faith and critical reason context, the freshman context, is not a whole lot different than the context of teaching high school seniors. So I found a lot of his framing and stuff super helpful and relevant to FCR. And moving ahead here, the slide here on learning from discomfort, this picture here of the group of students, this is actually a picture of John Seitz's Faith and Critical Reason class. He took a group of students to the Zen Temple of New York, and there was a monk that gave a talk there. You can see the spelling of the Zen Temple in New York. This is another site that students often go to on their own. Classes go there. I think this is the temple that our student speaker talked about going to. This is, I think, in the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side. But one thing to speak to students about before they go is how often when we go to religious field sites, especially communities that are not our own, it can invite a level of discomfort, even anxiety, and even some culture shock, that these feelings of, should I go in? What should I do? All that just anxiety of being a newcomer and learning about a new community can actually be a really important part of experiential learning. And I know that when I was an undergraduate, in a religious studies course I took, we had to do 3 different field sites, and I cannot remember anything else from that course, but I vividly remember the 3 communities I saw and how I felt before and going in, and I remember who I went with, and I remember after. I mean, because these strong feelings imprint themselves in our memories, and that's really can be the way learning, transformation, also memory making can happen. That said, students should never feel that their encounter with a particular religious community has to, threaten their sense of self or personal integrity. So, for example, religious communities that require gender segregated prayer, for example, might be uncomfortable for some students, but for some non-binary or gender queer students, going along, having to divide themselves in gender segregated prayer actually might, violate their personal integrity and would not be that kind of good pedagogical kind of anxiety, but would actually be uncomfortable in a way that would not really lend itself towards the pedagogical goals of the course. So, to be mindful of that, I always think having options, opt out options and options within the assignment, it can be really helpful. And he has some practical nuts and bolts advice that if you take a group of students or if you are giving them instructions to go, um, to just be mindful how subways, traffic, all that stuff leave much more time than you think you need. And I would say if you have the students go on their own, these are freshmen in the fall, many of them moving to New York City for the first time, and even students who are commuter students, a lot of them drive or take the subway right to campus, go back home. Not many of our freshman students are really comfortable yet moving all around the city. So if they have to make their way from campus or even from home to a mosque or to a religious community, a temple in the city, that's a big journey for them. I always think it's probably better for them to have this requirement be later in the semester or even by the end of the semester to just give them a little more time to get comfortable with the buses, the subway. This isn't something you'd want them to do on their own, the first month of classes. I think that would be pretty overwhelming. And to let them know, to give themselves plenty of time to figure out how to get there. And if at all possible, you might visit some of these sites yourself before you bring students or talk with community leaders about your goals and expectations. And many religious communities have websites, and there's a couple of them in one of the last slides, have websites very much dedicated to welcoming newcomers, welcoming students, welcoming visitors, and are explicit about appropriate dress. And all that sort of stuff. So just make sure to tell them, or you do it with them, to do a lot of that research about how to be a good guest and visitor before you come. And the tough thing is integrating this visit into your curriculum, not just having it be this extra kind of fun field trip that isn't connected to the readings or the assignment, to be thinking about what it is you want them to learn, and what text might it be in conversation with, and how might they reflect on their learning, whether in the form of a presentation or a paper, but to incorporate it somehow into the classroom where it's not just an extra kind of fun add-on. And then now I am moving along. I think I'm on the second to last slide. Um, that last, but actually first, making contact with your local faith communities. This is the thing I think that's intimidating to a lot of instructors, faculty, graduate instructors too, that it seems overwhelming or intimidating to go yourself and make a contact with a student, and feeling awkward of sending a hordes of freshmen to religious communities. But some of the large famous houses of worship are very, very set up and welcoming for visitors. So on the slide here, he has an example of the Islamic Cultural Center of New York, the Ganesh Temple, the Mahayana Buddhist Temple Association. These are all places in New York that have things completely set up for visitors. You can check it out or have your students check it out. Also, some local nonprofits, including Henry Goldschmidt's the Interfaith Center of New York, sometimes might be able to help out. They might be able to serve as guest speakers or welcome students. Also, your contacts at Fordham. I know, Janine Hill Fletcher has taken students to places. John Seitz has taken. Catherine Reckless does it. I have tended to do the larger trips of taking students. I take students every year to a Benedictine convent in Connecticut, and that's more of a bigger thing. We take a ram van. We do a whole unit on monasticism. And it's for smaller classes. And anyway, but there's a lot of people who've done this at Fordham who would be willing to talk with you and share things with you. And finally, just cold calls or emails to pastors, religious leaders. I think once, things calm down, medically, socially, politically, culturally in the city, and get back to normal, it's absolutely fine to just pick up the phone and call or send emails to religious communities and ask them if they would be okay to welcome students. But the easiest thing is to just give your students maybe a suggestion of a few places and have them choose some sites and just to go and look at places on their own, at some point by a deadline, before the end of the semester or before a certain point in the semester, not just the first couple of weeks. And finally, my last slide here, some further reading and resources. All of these websites, you can copy and paste them into your browser. Dr. Goldschmidt's organization has a ton of great PDF documents that you could read, or you could even assign to your students about visiting sacred spaces, observing religious events and communities, assigning student field research projects. You don't want to get too overwhelmed. I mean, this I know for all of you would be just a very small part of faith and critical reason, but it can be, it can be a really fun thing for for students, and it can be fun for you because you learn about the city, and it kind of just changes, I think, the temperature in the room when you start incorporating elements of the city into the classroom. And the final thing I would say about this, and this takes us to the end of the slide, so we can close our slides. The final thing I would say is there is, a lot for you to do to craft your faith and critical reason syllabus. There's a lot you have to put on, but you can't do it all. It's not going to be exhaustive. You obviously have to teach to your strengths. Stick to the basic course description that we all have. So this is totally an optional part of the assignment. But if you feel up to it, it can be a great thing for you, I'd say, for two reasons. One, it's just kind of lively and fun. Students love to go out. It's fun for you to learn about what they do. It just is kind of lightens things up, I would say, in the classroom. Many of them have just moved to New York City. They're so excited to have, an experience that's part of what they're doing in their classes, especially if you pair them up or in little teams. That can be great. The other thing is, if those of you who are going on the job market, in higher education, the longer I am at Fordham and the deeper my contacts go with other universities, with colleagues, and helping, being on search committees, one of the things that is really different about Fordham is that it is in New York City. And, that if you have a PhD that has, some training or some contact with the religious, just abundance of religious diversity in New York City, and you can kind of talk about that after you leave, you can kind of bring some of that experience and some of that knowledge with you elsewhere. That is a kind of a kind of a wow factor that's just not in other places in the country. So I encourage you to consider it. I know right now you have a lot on your mind. We all do, a lot on your plates. It might not be possible for you to get this going for the fall semester, but these are resources for you to consider as a possibility, either for this fall or for the future. The syllabus that you're going to be creating is hopefully the first in a long career of meaningful teaching opportunities that you'll have. So I will wrap it up at this point, and you know how to reach me if you have any questions. I hope you've learned something about various possibilities to encourage your faith and critical reason students to take advantage of the rich religious cultural diversity of New York City. Please let me know if you have questions or want to speak about any of this, but I will sign off for now. And I wish all of you health, well-being, peace, and sanity as we get through this tumultuous time. I'm thinking of you all and wish you all the best. If you are watching this today, happy Friday. It's almost the weekend. Stay safe, everybody. Goodbye.